This is the Sri Ramana Maharshi Satsang, a time to listen, reflect, and deeply meditate. Know yourself and be always free and at peace. Welcome. I'm Richard Clarke, hosting this satsang. I'm not a teacher or a guru, just someone who loves this teaching and wants to share it with like-minded people. I'm reviewing and commenting on the book Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi. This week is talk 63, and it's a long talk, so I just have excerpts from it. Let me get it up on the screen. A high officer asked if juniors are promoted over oneself, the mind is perturbed. Will the inquiry, who am I, help the man to soothe his mind under such circumstances? The Maharshi says, yes, quite so. The inquiry, who am I, turns the mind inward and makes it calm. The devotee said, I have faith in Murti Dhyana, worship of form. Will it not help me gain jnana, spiritual knowledge? The Maharshi says, surely it will. Upasana, worship, helps concentration of mind. Then the mind is free from other thoughts and is full of the meditated form. The mind becomes it, and thus quite pure. Then think, who is the worshipper? The answer is I, that is the self. So the self is gained ultimately. The present difficulty is that the man thinks that he is the doer, but it's a mistake. It is the higher power that does everything, and the man is only a tool. If he accepts that position, he's free from trouble. Otherwise, he courts them. He asked, what about the reference to duality in practice and unity at the end? The Maharshi said, some people think that one must begin practice with dualistic idea. It refers to them. They say that there is God. The man must worship and meditate. Ultimately, the jiva merges into God. Others say the Supreme Being and the jiva are always apart and never merge into each other. Howsoever it may be at the end, let us not trouble ourselves about it now. All are agreed that the jiva is. Let the man find out the jiva, that is his self. Then there will be time to find out if the self should merge in the Supreme, is a part thereof, or remains different from it. Let us not forestall the conclusion. Keep an open mind, dive within, and find out the self. The truth itself will dawn on you. Then the devotee says, one of the stanzas say that the scriptures so scrupulously studied in the earlier stages are ultimately of no use. At what stage do they become useless? The Maharshi says, when their essence is realized. The scriptures are useful to indicate the existence of a higher power, the self, and the way to gain it. Their essence is that much only. When that is assimilated, the rest is useless. Similarly, also with the man in the self, there is nothing to be gained anew. Ignorance of the self is the cause of the present memory. Knowledge of the self brings about happiness. Moreover, if anything is to be got anew, it implies its previous absence. What remained once absent might vanish again. So there would be no permanency in salvation. Salvation is permanent because the self is here and now and eternal. Thus, the man's efforts are directed towards the removal of ignorance. Wisdom seems to dawn, though it is natural and ever present. Now, my comment. The dialogue starts with the question, the mind is perturbed. Will the inquiry, who am I, help? Ramana responds, quite so. The inquiry, who am I, turns the mind inward and makes it calm. When we think we are the body, mind, and the ego, then whatever happens to them, we think happens to us. This idea often brings disturbances when we imagine our happiness will be affected. The disturbance is based on misidentification, the idea that we are this body, mind, and ego. Inquiry challenges this misidentification. As the misidentification starts to dissolve, so does the disturbance. This dissolution brings with it calm and inner peace. So inquire. The discussion continues now about practice, specifically the benefit of worship. The questioner asks, I have faith in worship of form. Will it not help me to gain spiritual knowledge? Ramana replies, surely it will. Worship helps concentration of mind. Then the mind is free from other thoughts and is full of the meditated form. The mind becomes it, and thus quite pure. The basic idea in yoga is that the mind becomes what it thinks about. So Ramana says the focus on the higher power quiets the mind. Mental focus moves away from your individual concerns, so they disturb you less, and the mind quiets. Ramana then tells us what to do with the quiet mind. Then think, who is the worshiper? The answer is I, that is the self. So the self is gained ultimately. Ramana often would teach inquiry to those who asked him questions. After finding out what practice they currently have, he would tell them how to redirect their current practice into self-inquiry. This questioner has a practice of worship. So Ramana tells him to inquire, who is the worshiper? Find out who it is that worship, and you will discover behind it, so to say, the self, your own being and existence. Using a metaphor from The Wizard of Oz, you'll find the man behind the curtain. Ramana goes on to say, the present difficulty is that the man thinks he's the doer, but it's a mistake. It is the higher power which does everything, and the man is only a tool. If he accepts that position, he is free from trouble. Otherwise, he courts them. The officer started his questioning, disturbed about the promotion over him of underlings. Ramana drills down into this, saying, the present difficulty is that the man thinks that he is the doer. If the man is a doer, then the results of his actions are for him. This result was the promotion of underlings instead of himself. This felt like failure, and he was deeply upset. Ramana showed him what was the basis of this upset. It was not his actions, but rather his misidentification as the doer, which includes misidentification with the results of action of that doer. But what if he is not the doer? Then the actions are not his, and neither are the results. Misidentification as the doer stands in the way of deeper knowledge and experience. This is my main misidentification, I think. Because of this, I can't say from experience how to get past it. I can only tell you my ideas, and ideas fall short. On to the next part of the dialogue. As the questioner asks about the idea of duality in practice and unity at the end, Ramana responds that different teachers teach different things to different seekers at different places in their search. But howsoever it may be at the end, let us not trouble about it now. What matters now is your own search, your practice and experience. Words and ideas from other teachers besides your own are just distractions. Focus on your own practice and experience. Some questions, like the nature of reality and self-realization, cannot really be answered by thought or words. Thoughts and words are about what is known objectively. The mind knows only objects. Words describe these objects. Who we are is not an object. Reality is not an object. So realizing who you are is not objective knowledge. Knowing reality is not objective knowledge. These can be known, though. They are obvious. What could be more obvious than your own existence and consciousness? What is more obvious than reality? You can't know either with the mind, though. You can know them directly because you are them. They are you. Ramana instructs, keep an open mind. dive within, and find out the self. The truth itself will dawn upon you. The dialogue concludes with a question about scriptures that are studied in the early stage and that ultimately are of no use. When did they become of no use? Ramana says, when their essence is realized. The scriptures are useful to indicate the existence of the higher power, the self, and the way to gain it. Their essence is that much only. When that is assimilated, the rest is useless. Buddhists talk about the finger and the teacher and his finger pointed to the moon. Knowing the moon is the point, not the finger. So don't mistake the finger for the moon. The scriptures, the collected teachings, point the seeker towards the truth. Once this is found, you no longer need the guidance, so it can be discarded. We must find it for ourselves and know it for ourselves. The way to know it is to be it, since it can't be known as an object. So we don't really find it for ourselves, we find it as ourselves. But is it transformation? Is it something new? Ramana says there is nothing to be gained anew. Ignorance of the self is the cause of the present misery. Knowledge of the self brings about happiness. Since knowledge of the self is what is needed, then inquiry, investigating and discovering ourself is what is needed. But are we going to discover something new within ourselves? Or is it more like the revelation of what was already there? Ramana continues, moreover, if anything is to be got anew, it implies its previous absent. What remained once absent might vanish again, so there would be no permanency in salvation. Salvation is permanent because the self is here and now and eternal. Thus, the man's efforts are directed towards the removal of ignorance. Wisdom seems to dawn, though it is natural and ever present. If it comes, it goes. One thing I love about this teaching is that it emphasizes that the place to look for your spiritual answers is within yourself, here and now. Since it is within yourself, you don't need to find or gain or achieve anything new. You don't need anything external. You don't need to change yourself or improve yourself. You don't need anything other than what you are already. It is permanent since it is who you are, and you are who you are all the time. What else could you possibly be? This deep knowledge may be obscured, covered by an idea that you have assumed to be reality. So what is needed is not a new idea to supplant the old one, but rather to discover that the idea was never true to begin with. When you know this, then the truth that this false idea obscured is revealed. It was always there, just covered, so to say, by the ignorant view from the wrong idea. So we don't need anything else like some other knowledge from an external source. What we need is to question and look deeply within ourselves, investigating our identity. What do we consider ourselves to be? Ramana's question, who am I, indicates this internal investigation. So inquire, who am I? And now we'll listen to my teacher, Nome, with a discourse. What is it that you truly are?
The Maharshi has said that to say I have realized or I know the self and I have not realized or I don't know the self are both matters for laughter. They are absurd statements. The self is not something objective to be known or unknown. Your being cannot become an object, conceived or perceived. And if a searching inquiry be made as to who is it that knows, who is it that does not know, there is found to be no one answering to the name of I. Inquire within yourself, taking your own sense of immutable existence as the basis of the inquiry. Trace out your own existence and know what is there. It is not the body. It is not any of the thoughts constituting the mind. What is it that is assumed to be an I, but which is actually existing all the time? What is it that it is assumed to become embodied, to have birth and death, but which is itself actually unborn, imperishable, and formless and unembodied? What is it that seems to be at the center of all thoughts, yet itself actually is never conceived, the unknown knower of all that is known, as the Upanishad says? What is it that you truly are? If just this much is realized, Brahman knows Brahman. Reality comprehends itself. With a knowledge that is eternal, not a knowledge divided into knower, knowing, and known, but non-dual knowledge, in which being and knowledge are identical. Being is not an object, and it is not an activity. Likewise, knowledge is not something gained or lost. In the inquiry to know yourself, the dissolution of the inquirer, or the penetration into the nature of the inquirer, is what is essential. The dissolution of his individuality, what seems to mark him off as a separate being, the abandonment of such false definition, is the progress so-called. Actually, one is traveling no distance whatsoever. It is more like dreaming you were one thing and waking up to find that you were not that thing at all, that you were dreaming. If this happens, is there any transformation? Yet the old delusion is gone. Misidentification constituted the delusion. And delusion alone was the cause of any of the bondage or suffering experienced in that dream. To be free of suffering, to liberate yourself from the imagined bondage, be rid of delusion. Delusion is just confusion regarding your own nature, taking yourself to be something that you are not. Inquiry resolves the delusion and reveals a knowledge that is innate. In the earnest attempt to realize this knowledge, approached by dissolution of what you assume yourself to be. If all that is falsely supposed is abandoned, then without anything more whatsoever, the remainder is the truth itself, the Supreme Self itself, happy and at peace in its own nature always. Suppose yourself to be the ego, and the self will seem to be elusive. Inquire and find the non-existence of that I, and you yourself are what you have found. Falsely assume yourself to be the body, and realization will seem exceedingly difficult. God or the Absolute will seem to be something other. Abandon the misidentification with the body. Then where are you? Where is God? If identified with the body, you will look for the self as something sensed, or as a sensing entity. Be free of such confusion. If identified with the mind, you will look for the self or realization, or reality, in the form of some mental mode or mental state. Your real nature, what is to be realized, is free of any mental mode, free of any mental state, whether it be waking, dreaming, deep dreamless sleep, or any mode occurring within those states. You are not a state of mind. The realization is likewise. You are not a condition of the body. The realization is likewise. Free of the body, free of the mind. Non-objective, unchanging. This space-like, very real remainder, which alone has been existing always, is the truth of your being. Know it experientially, firsthand for yourself. It is natural by the dissolution of the one who supposedly does not know.
Now we'll take a few minutes and inquire ourselves. Notice that you exist, and you know that you exist without thinking about it or sensing it. You just know. And now inquire, investigate within yourself. What do you consider yourself to be? What comes and goes within yourself? What is always present within yourself? What is always? It's there now. What is always? Who am I? What is the nature of my existence? All right. We'll close with a chant. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om. Peace, peace, peace. Hello, I'm glad you were able to join us, Evelyn.
Yes, this was a few minutes late.
Yes. Any discussion?
You know, we were talking before you began about the appeal of, I guess, of Ramana's teachings, and we're so oriented to getting stuff, to understanding, you know, and what Ramana reveals is how separating understanding is, how much is a product of the mind, and how the realization is the unknowing.
Yes.
No understanding. And so it doesn't attract a lot of people in the West, I don't think, because we're into understanding and getting this and that. So it's a challenge. But it's a subtle teaching that is so rich, and I feel so blessed to have come to it.
Yes. Yes.
Well, for me, what I like to be reminded of always is that self-inquiry is all you need to do. And that self-inquiry itself will dissolve the ego.
Mhm. Well, the ego only stands because we don't question or challenge it.
Right.
And certainly one of the things that I think we've all experienced when you start the inquiry is there are all kinds of things that I thought I was, but when I look at them, they're all things that are transitory, and I am who I am all the time.
Mm-hmm. Just stick with that.
And in the unknown, in the unknowing, you are a great mystery.
Except it's knowable.
In being it.
That's right. It's just knowable in a different way than cognitive. That's one of the problems many people have. I have it myself. I feel like, doing something, practicing will help me get closer to it. And I feel like it has, but it's not through the practice. It's funny. When the practice is deep enough to where it just gets out of the way, then maybe that's when the practice actually starts.
Yeah. So much grace.
The rishis who were with Dakshinamurti in his silence, they must have tried at the beginning to figure out what's he saying with that silence. And then finally, their mind stopped looking for knowledge from him, and they were able to dive into what was deeper. That's what he was really saying.
Yeah.
Anyway, very good. It was good to be with you again.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time.
Okay.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Yeah.